Ladies and gentlemen, from Discern Analytics, please welcome author and technology futurist, Paul Saffo.
Good afternoon and welcome to this session. The data center is dead. Long live the data center. Pick one, pick both, pick neither. That's what we're about to explore. And the context here is it's a shorthand for the challenges facing you all. The way I see it, the role of IT today is sort of living that quote of Bill Gibson's, "The future's already arrived, it's just not evenly distributed yet." You're juggling three utterly incompatible balls. First job, identifying new technologies, bringing them in. If there was a motto for that, it would be adopt, adapt, and incorporate. Then you also have all the legacy stuff that seems to hang around for a lot longer than any of us would wish. You know, in IT, it seems like all the wrong things are immortal. And the motto there is manage, migrate, mitigate. And then the third area is the over-the-horizon trends, the long-term view, anticipating what otherwise might become surprises, both as opportunities and as risks. And I think that role of IT is to identify and strategize. No one person could possibly cover all three of those things. In fact, if I look at the IT role today, it's a little bit like, you know, if you're out hiking, don't be a bird watcher and a mushroom hunter. They're just incompatible hobbies, because one of them's got you looking up all the time, the other one's got you looking down. So try and think about the long-term future. At the same time, you're trying to deal with tough decisions about legacy systems. That's the challenge. Well, what we have this afternoon is a really terrific panel that in the next hour is going to explore just where IT is and where it is headed out over the next 10, 15 years, and most importantly, what it means about next Monday when everybody is back after the conference and making strategic decisions. So I'm going to invite my panelists to come up here, and I will, come on up, guys, don't be shy. In a moment, right over here will be Marc Andreessen, co-founder and partner of Andreessen Horowitz. If anyone could say he was there at the creation of the cloud, it would be Marc. In fact, we think a lot of this is his fault. We'll get to that. And next to him is Andy Bechtolsheim, co-founder, chief development officer at Arista Networks. Next to Andy is Graeme Hay, who's head of infrastructure, architecture, and strategy at Credit Suisse. So he's a real IT guy, not just an IT guy coming up with new things to disrupt everybody's lives. And last but not least, Pat Gelsinger, who's CEO of a small startup here in Silicon Valley, VM something or another. So welcome to you all. Oh, and I apologize, one little housekeeping detail. I have an iPad here, and I'm watching the Twitter feed. If you have a question, tweet it to #FutureOfIT, and hopefully it'll float past. It's a very short session, so we're not going to have a lot of time for questions, but I am morally against waiting till the last 5 minutes and saying, oh, if there are any questions from the audience. So here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to look for questions coming across here. I'll bring them into the conversation. If you put your name on it and you have a really provocative question, we'll run a mic to you. And if there's someone in the room who just absolutely can't stand it, and you know something is being said that you just violently disagree with or absolutely endorse, like when everybody starts beating up on Marc, if you want to rise to his defense, put up 2 hands, and we'll run a mic to you some way or another. So we'll kind of do this on the fly. So where to start? You know, I think we should start with you, Graeme, since you really are at ground zero in this revolution. You actually have to make all this stuff work and the like. What's your take on the short term for IT and some pragmatic advice for all of us trying to make sense of this?
Sure. So, our story at Credit Suisse very similar to a lot of the enterprises. I look at the technology that we have, I look at the projects that we have, and I just use a simple 80-20 rule in terms of how we think about our portfolio. 80% of it is really about running the place like an industrial plant. What we do is a slow, steady, year-on-year process efficiency, take cost out, keep capability, give the business, plus or minus 5%, 10% in terms of capacity, maintain that capability. That's the 80% of the story that we run in the enterprise. The 20%, though, is where we spend our innovation time, and that's where we, the projects, the individual technologies that we deploy in those spaces, that's where the rubber meets the road in that respect.
Any thoughts on this? I mean, I have one question. How do you allocate the 20%?
Well, at the moment for Wall Street, it's simply on return on investment. So,
but I mean, how do you identify the things that constitute the 20%?
So, I mean, in terms of just close partnership with the businesses. So we're very close to understanding what makes our businesses tick. So for example, for us, we've got the industry-leading equities transaction system, the dark pool that was kind of called into action the other day. For there we spend a lot of time thinking about what's next for those technologies in those spaces, similarly to the risk engines that we run.
But is 20% the right number? I mean, I argued this morning we should be increasing it. Innovation amount at 20%.
So what should the number be, Pat?
Well, I said in the keynote this morning it should be 50-50. Right, that we should be driving a much larger increase in the industry average, right, at least by IDC. And some questions, what's keeping the lights on and running today versus what's innovation dollars. And I think there's some dispute over that, but we argue 50-50 is the right number. So Graeme might tell me I'm nuts, but 20% seems like too small of a number.
I think it depends on the industry. So I'm thinking about the size of our portfolio, and a lot of what we do it because we have to do it. Of course we want to do it, but a lot of it is because we have to do it. That doesn't really add an awful lot to our shareholders. The 20% is what really adds to the shareholders. That's where we want to make sure we concentrate our efforts.
So you think that's the right number?
It's a good rule of thumb, yeah.
Okay.
Good. So
I prefer 99.1, but that's just me.
Well, Mark, actually, I have a question for you from the audience. Patrick Fagan is asking an immensely practical question that has really important long-term implications. My company is building a new HQ building. Should we build a full-blown data center, or should we migrate everything? And I know you have some thoughts about architecture, and I don't just mean software architecture.
So, I mean, Andy's probably a better person to answer this particular question. I guess I would say any new business, I think, should consider going 100% cloud from the very start. I mean, we actually do. I mean, my venture capital firm is a small-scale instance of this. We have 85 people, so certainly not a large-scale operation in terms of headcount. But we run entirely cloud. We run entirely on Google Apps. We run entirely on Salesforce.com. We run entirely on Box.net. And it's just fantastic. I mean, and actually run almost entirely on wireless networking. It's almost all intangible. And so there are just absolutely enormous benefits to getting into the new world. We see the same thing happening, all the Silicon Valley startups. It's extremely rare to see a Silicon Valley startup with a CapEx budget, especially in its early years. We like to joke the sort of CapEx budget for typical Silicon Valley startup now is, 4 laptops. Always Macs, but 4 laptops. And then the assumption for companies building very high-scale environments, the assumption is that they go all cloud for all of the applications that they're building, all the data that they're storing. And there's just enormous benefits to get into the other side of the switch.
Well, we disagree, by the way. So
yeah. It's a controversial point here at this conference.
We just disagree.
Say more.
Yeah.
Well, the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of people like Graeme, right? Who have highly regulated businesses, right? And people who just say put everything in the cloud, right? Have never visited a regulated customer, right? Who has real SLAs, real premise requirements, real governance requirements, et cetera, associated with that. Also, as we've clearly seen, right? Geographic has very different views of this as well, right? Also, as you get to higher scale, right? Cost factors come into play, governance, we're seeing people bring things back internal, right? After they've had their experience and being able to have the CapEx light for that initial burst of their activities coming in, right? And we've clearly argued, as right, you heard us today from the keynotes, that hybrid cloud, this balance of the two is the right right answer. Not that that doesn't mean there's going to be a secular increase in the amount of public cloud services, but the right answer for the long term, right, and the long term is decades, right, will be a careful balance of what's internal and external. So we couldn't agree less with that perspective.
Very good.
Do you agree with me, Graeme? Come on, help me, buddy. I just stood up for you, buddy. Help me.
Andy, you've watched this going back and forth. Would you arbitrate this?
Well, it depends on the size of the company. I mean, for startups, cloud services are perfect, right? There's no upfront capital cost. In our own case, our company now has about 700 people. We really run the IT on the cloud, but we're just building a new 1.5 megawatt data center just for engineering, test, and debug. So, you may need capital investments to solve your business problem one way or the other. It depends the business you're in.
It does depend on what business you're in, but it is a very interesting divergence that's taking place. Sort of to your point, and I have actually visited a lot of regulated businesses. One of the characteristics of companies in general, not necessarily yours, but one of the characteristics in general of companies that have large install bases, have lots of regulation, they're operating at high scale, and have all these other, sort of the 80-20 characteristic is they slow way down. Like in aggregate, in general, they slow way down. One of the huge advantages that the raw startup obviously has is the ability to have a clean sheet of paper and take a new approach. All of those companies are using the new technologies. They're all jumping to cloud as fast as they can. And so the rate of change that they can then have based on that, literally I said 99.1, I wasn't joking, like 99% of their IT capability and effort is devoted to innovation. And so the speed of attack and the level of aggressiveness and the level of change that they can have is just way disproportionately in excess to what a lot of legacy businesses have to deal with. And I think there's a real fundamental question at the heart of a lot of industries right now, which is, as we like to say, software eats the world. As software becomes more and more the central battleground for how businesses compete in industries, how much is legacy an advantage, which it historically has been in many businesses, and how much is nimbleness and agility an advantage. And the new companies are showing a lot of capability generated off using the new technologies.
If I could add one thing.
Jump in, Andy.
One thing large enterprise can do is to aggressively adopt the latest technologies, including the latest from VMware, the latest Intel servers, the latest networking, to make their installed base, to turn it over more quickly for more cost effectiveness, better scalability, more mobility. So the advantages of rapid adoption of new technologies are not just in the cloud for startups, they're also available to large enterprise in their own data center.
So, Graeme, I had a moment last Friday when I was thinking of you and the operational role you have. So I lead the futures track at Singularity University, and we were voting on the team projects that 18 teams had done. They'd spent 10 weeks working on this. So all of us on core faculty are voting, and they decided this year they said, it's too slow if you write it on paper. We need you to do this electronically. And they lashed up something in Google Docs for us. And it was just intricate enough that none of us took any written notes. We were all typing on screen. How many people remember what happened at about 2:30 in the afternoon last Friday with Google? A few hands may have gone up here. We had an outage, and we lost every single bit that was typed in for the whole team.
It doesn't happen too often, but it happens occasionally.
I mean, the good news for me, I thought, well, at least I don't have to reboot my computer. It's not my problem, but I still lost my data.
Whereas I didn't, because my notes were in my own data center, which is what I think Pat's looking for.
Right. So
here's the counter argument on that: is the reason that makes such a compelling story is because it's literally never happened before. Right, and so it's been like 13 years of fantastic execution followed by one 5-minute outage. In contrast, internal data centers, and this is one of the things I find so fascinating about internal environments, that people are like, well, the cloud is not secure, it's not reliable, I don't know where my data is and all that. Internal environments are riddled with faults, defects, crashes, bugs, data corruption, lack of backup, security holes, viruses, Chinese hackers, across the board. Right, and anybody who thinks that their internal environments are not like horribly corrupted, every single second of the day, and the cloud is worse than that. I mean, that's where I start to get really confused. And I predict where this is going to go. I mean, I think the cloud's going to be viewed ultimately as far more stable. For sure, I think it already is, than most internal environments. But I think the security argument is going to flip. I think the leading cloud environments are going to be viewed as much more secure than most internal environments. I think that's actually factually true in many cases today. It's getting more true all the time. There are new technologies coming out that will make that even more the case. And I think in 10 years, the idea that the cloud is not the most secure option will vanish.
If there was any debate on that, Snowden took care of it.
Yeah, right.
Right. I mean,
Yeah. What was the attack? Carrying the flash drive.
But all of a sudden, right, all of a sudden, this is not a question that we get to debate anymore. It's now one, right, that national governments are going to say, no, we're not going to put them into cloud data centers that we don't control, right? And you're actually going to see things go in the exact opposite direction, right, as a result of that, right, where, right, it's going to be increasingly governed, right, under government authorities, under national interest, into data centers that are managed locally.
So Pat,
I interpret the exact opposite.
Just a TTY interrupt here, Pat. This morning in the keynote, one of the key points you made was IT management gives way to automation. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking of two things. One, how many people are worried about their jobs in this room? Show of hands. Very optimistic, or you're just
there are loyal, disruptive.
Right. Okay.
This is the benefit, man. This is
the NSA's reaction to Snowden was they said, well, we're going to eliminate 90% of our sysops.
Correct. That's the only way to make it more secure.
Are you telling these people are going to be out of a job?
I don't think there's a lot of, first of all, I don't think there's a lot of NSA.
The good news is your data is secure. The bad news is you're going to have a lot of time for your stamp collection.
Right.
Yeah. Andy.
I'm going to let Pat take the question.
Okay, Pat.
I think Graeme was anxious.
Well, I think so. I'll be the boring enterprise guy here for a second, which I guess is my role on stage.
We love you.
I get the
you
question.
may be boring, but we love you.
That's fine.
Right?
We'll just take the cost out. Just do the enterprise thing. For us, the question we get on the cloud, every day I get the question, why not Amazon, why not cloud, et cetera. And for us, it's a simple economics. I mean, we've got a very good understanding of what our internal costs are. We understand the service that most of our customers want. We're very happy fulfilling that from our own internal cloud. We do look at the economics and opportunities in the outside, and should the right thing come along, we'll certainly take a look at it. But that's the simple way that the enterprises look at this thing.
Yeah, and where Mark and I do agree, right, is there is a secular shift to public cloud services, right, as this increasing agility, flexibility, et cetera. But, it does have to be built in a way that truly is, right, segmented, it truly has security policies, et cetera, associated with that. And we don't think that it's going to be for decades, right, until people stop building their own data centers, right, because, right, it's these privacy issues, these security issues, governance, SLAs, cost issues, all of that sort of thing are going to take forever, because regulation is slower than, right, it's the slowest thing in this, right? Technology moves fast, right? Businesses move slower, politics move slower, and regulation moves the slowest of all, right? And those things are just going to make this take decades until many of these fundamental things work out. And then you're going to get to pure economics, like Graeme said, and the economics of running an efficient local data center, right? That really is efficient, right? This is what we're out to help our customers do, right? We'll have people do things like Zynga, bring it back internal. It's just better that way, right, at the end of the day. So a good hybrid solution, the right answer forever, just like I said this morning.
Well, I find this personally encouraging. Is about a year ago, I broke down and put in a 5 terabyte RAID at home, and that's the good news. The bad news is I'm my own IT professional. I still haven't quite figured out the backup software. If there's anybody in the room who wants to help me afterwards, drop me a note. But Pat, I want to stick with this and just drive this down even more specifically to the changing role of IT. And I know you and Graeme have talked about this before. You have the vision of IT professional as curator. And Graeme has IT professional as broker, probably no coincidence that it's Credit Suisse, but talk about what's the difference between a broker and a curator?
Well, at least my view of this is, right, IT needs to elevate their role to look across a set of services, because IT is operating many things they really don't need to. Right, in many cases, and just saying, that's better done as truly as a SaaS service, right? And for those low value things that we're not getting value from, right, I have gone through the work to prove which are the right services, and I can present those to the businesses that I service, right, as the best way to go get things done. right? In that sense, they are able to bring those services forward to the business, but they're able to say in other areas, no, right? We're not going to put stuff up on Dropbox. We're not going to do these certain things because they do violate our policies, governance, et cetera, associated with it. So it's the right set of those services, what's internal, what's external, and IT should be elevating their role to deliver those into the business. And increasingly, right, we see IT actually enabling businesses to become service providers themselves, where they turn the internal assets of the firm into services that they're offering, right? And in fact, every data center becomes a service provider in the future, right? Where they are offering those services to their customers and their partners as well.
And I don't think it's a matter of seeing it differently. We actually, so in Credit Suisse, being Swiss-German, we use the word Dreischeiber, which is a better connotation than English broker, which, well, I come from New York, so brokers are, if you deal with them in apartment finding or buying property, it's a bad thing. So Dreischeiber is an equitable distributor. It's seen as a trusted partner for you. So we look for our businesses to see us as trusted partners in the advice on, how do I go to a SaaS-based cloud, or how do I go and evaluate this external service? Really they're coming to us saying, look, find me the most economic solution for X. And that's our job. If we're trusted, we could go internal or we could go external, as Pat said. It's finding the best deal for our own internal customer. So I think we see the role very, very similar.
Yep. I love both of the terms. They're very, very evocative.
And I think, to your point earlier about, jobs for folks, I think, after Pat's, automated everybody away, right? We become these brokers.
Good. Well, the good news is nobody will notice they lost their job because they're all going to be in retraining so much that, sorry. I have where's Kelby Marsh in the audience? They're shining bright lights in our eyes. Oh, good, perfect. Jason, do we still have a wireless mic around here, or did you? No, it was handed up to stage. Do me a favor, Kelby. There's a mic on a stand right behind you. Would you just stand up and ask the question? His tweet was, how do you bridge the cloud gap with more tenured business leaders? And I'd love you to hear just a little more detail on that question for the panel.
Yeah, just my experience is that talking about being innovative, where the split is, and as you come into a new agency or organization, the way the business is going, a lot of times to implement things fast, quick, all those things, you have to look at off-prem solutions. But when it comes to being comfortable with security of your data, your intellectual property, a lot of times you get a lot of pushback from the more tenured, I like to call them, business leaders in the organization. But yet, then when it comes time to lay out the capital to build it out in your own data center, you get a lot of pushback as well. So just kind of walking that line between how to approach with CapEx versus OpEx in a hosted like cloud solution.
So to rephrase, how do you bring the skeptical dinosaurs along?
I guess I probably do it most of all anybody on the panel here. To be honest, you start with economics. Things like security and stuff are, you have to take care of those things, but if you lead with the business case, what is it you're trying to solve? Sit down and understand your own internal costs versus the external costs of that provider and make a decision on that basis.
Yeah. But besides the economics, the one thing people like about the cloud is ease of deployment, right? You can whip out your credit card and you're online. Now, if the traditional corporate enterprise gets to the same point, which is deployment in minutes or hours, or maybe it's a day instead of weeks, that would be a very useful transformation. And obviously, all the good things VMware is working on are going that direction, right? So part of the frustration people had with traditional IT was just the dinosaur aspect that you couldn't move it. Whereas in the cloud, it seems so easy. So once you combine this attribute in the internal data center, it actually becomes quite interesting.
One other comment, I'm a venture capitalist, so I can't help promote one of my companies, so bear with me. So there are new technologies emerging very quickly to address a whole bunch of the traditional concerns on cloud, and one is security. One of our companies, Cypher Cloud, I think has an approach where when middle managers, when sort of normal people see it, they react very positively to it, which is basically encrypt everything in the cloud. Have one box behind your network, which is this company, Cypher Cloud, and then encrypt everything up in the cloud so the cloud provider doesn't even have access to the data. They just have what looks to them to be gibberish. And the magic of it is everything is still searchable, all the applications work the same, the cloud provider doesn't even know that the data is encrypted. And so there's sort of a win-win where you get all the benefits deploying into the cloud without having any security compromises. In fact, this is why I say I think the cloud's more secure. You take an approach like that, you're probably actually more secure than you are internally because most internal data is actually still not encrypted. And so the state of the art of technology on cloud adoption is moving really quickly right now, and it's worth, I think, spending time with these new companies that have these new approaches.
So I want to look out sort of beyond the current wave of applications. I mean, we everyone on this panel has been through a couple of waves of creative destruction in Silicon Valley. And we all know the classic pattern that whenever a new technology is introduced, we typically use it to pave the cow paths, to do some old thing in a new way. I mean, DOS looked exactly like a command line interface. And thank heavens that Apple didn't invent email, because when it was time to send it, an envelope would have appeared on screen and they would have made you lick the screen to send it. So we always do the old thing in a new way. And then after a while, then we get into the new applications that never existed before. So, for example, using the cloud to do word processing to me is paving the cow paths. And as we move deeper into the cloud, it's obvious that the growth area is going to be functions that could never be done on the earlier machines. It's not that we're moving everything we do today onto the cloud, but rather we're going to be doing completely new, in theory, more strategic things, so I imagine a lot of games too. What are those new, services, applications, call them whatever. What are the new central activities 5 years from now that if, people heard about them today go, well, that's odd. Why? What's the innovations?
Well,
Andy.
Can I actually talk to email in the cloud? Because email on Google, I think, actually works better than the old way. Because the advantage Google has is they have 100 millions of mailboxes. So if there's a spam mail and they see 100,000 copies, they know it's spam. You don't need any other mechanism to sort of weed these things out. And the search on Google Mail is unparalleled. So after switching to Google Email, I don't think it'll go back to a traditional email.
So that's that's transformative.
Because there's an additional value, even though it's still email, it actually works better.
Fair enough.
As an example.
So I think a really big thing happening, I think the cloud architecture shift and I think the mobile architecture shift are linked. I think it's significant that they're both happening at the same time, and I think the thing that ultimately necessitates move to cloud is because cloud is the ideally adapted back end to all the mobile devices, right? It doesn't make sense for any individual mobile device to have the complete, panoply of functionality, that a desktop PC used to have. In fact, you want quite the opposite. You want very lightweight access to all the resources. I think 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the number, I think we're going to go, right now there's fewer computers in the world than there are people. I think in 5 years there'll be there'll be more computers than there are people. I think most people will be using more than one computer. Might have a smartphone and a tablet and a laptop, and they might walk up to a wall, with a big screen or a table, or they might go to a public kiosk, or they might have, something wearable, glasses, or, a wristwatch or something. And so you want to load as much functionality into the cloud so that people can get value out of their mobile devices, so that we can adopt mobile technologies faster. And I think what's happening in practice, both on the public internet side and inside enterprises, those shifts are directly linked.
So Pat, he's actually sounding conservative for a moment.
Yeah, he is.
Would you put a little pressure on him?
Completely deny that allegation.
Yeah, it's going to ruin your reputation, Mark.
Yes, it really will.
Right, but as I touched on this morning, social, mobile, cloud, big data, right? We see these four things sort of simultaneously disrupting all of business, disrupting all of consumer IT, and also to say what's the app, I think is almost missing the point in the sense that there's actually going to be everybody's app. Right. In fact, because there's going to be this explosion of applications because you're going to be able to create, the app, is my app the app that I want, right? It's going to be, being able to compose these services that are available in the cloud, combine them with certain things that are behind the firewall, being able to bring out, right, to new capabilities as a result. And, this is, one area that I think that the whole idea that of big, heavy apps, right, is gone. Right, it's going to be composed services that are going to become richer and richer and more capable. So it really will be an environment where there's billions of users, right? With tens of billions of computers of some form, right? That are going to have maybe billions of applications as well, because my app is going to give me the thing that I need, right? And when it doesn't anymore, I'm going to compose a new version of the application as well. So I think in fact that this whole idea of software and application flexibility is actually about to go through an even bigger renaissance, right? As you're able to do hybrid cloud, right? You're going to be able to access big data. You're going to have all these mobile devices compared with all these social experiences, and the confluence of that will be an explosion of applications like we have never experienced before in the history of computing.
Give me a specific example. I mean, I'm bought into the vision, but what's Angry Birds in 2015?
What's Angry Birds? Well, I think they're still going to
What's the hit we're all going to want to use?
Still going to be Angry Birds. Whatever. I don't know. Whatever the fad game is going to be. But where you're going to be able to say, my mobile application, right? For my healthcare is going to be my healthcare application running on my mobile device that I'm going to ask it to keep track of my health, right? My heart rate and these kind of things. I'm going to connect it up to my doctor, right? To be able to give him my updates, and he's going to call me the morning that I had a heart irregularity when I was sleeping at night. Right, and it's going to connect up to my car and be able to route me to my doctor on my way in the morning, right before I get there. I mean, these are going to be incredible things that are going to be the composition of these services and devices, right, with on, off-premise, hybrid clouds, Bill, right, and bringing together those service in powerful ways.
Let me give you my favorite examples.
Awesome. Okay.
So, here in California, for those of you visiting, you may notice an unusually high concentration of Teslas driving around.
The only place on Earth, right?
What's that?
Only place on Earth, right?
Yeah, well, they're making progress. So Tesla's now up to 12% of California luxury car purchases. So they're outselling most of the big dogs. Getting into a Tesla for the first time, the new Tesla sedan if you're an IT person, it's a transformative experience because it's
a video game console.
It's literally like it's the closest you can get to playing Grand Theft Auto without getting arrested. It literally is like, well, I mean, basically, first of all, the car is actually more like a rolling laptop than it is like a car. Like it's got 1,000 pounds of basically a laptop batteries in the floor. It's actually really funny. It's got two trunks, right? The hood, it's got the trunk, and then it's got the other trunk in front because there's no conventional engine. But you go inside, and the first thing you notice inside is there's this gigantic monster screen, right? Instead of it's like a 17-inch touch display. And so it's got Google Maps, right? So forget all the navigation. It's got full Google Maps, right? It's got full internet radio. So forget all the satellite radio, all that stuff. Just listen to whatever stream you want or on demand, whatever you want. It's got a web browser, which is just like the coolest thing I've ever seen. You can be driving, you can be surfing the internet, which might,
So the image here is instead of last Friday, it's Friday 2018, and I'm in my Tesla, and the cloud goes down. What happens?
All the cars grind to a complete halt, of course. We need to get to the self-driving car before we have that problem, which we're not quite there yet. But here's what's interesting is it's funny how expectations level up, right? We all get so used to this, right? So the comedian Louis C.K. has this great thing where he says everything's amazing and nobody's happy. So here's an example: everything's amazing and nobody's happy. I go in the thing and I get in there in the morning and I've got to come up here and I'm like, okay, this is great. I got my apps, I got my music, I got all this stuff, but my car doesn't have my calendar yet, which means I still have to actually enter on the touchpad. I have to actually enter the address of Moscone Center, and so I'm annoyed that it doesn't have access to Google. My car does not have access to Google Calendar, and that's really pissing me off.
They'll fix it next year.
Right, and they'll fix it. Andy says they'll fix it. Like literally, they do the over-the-air software patches. They'll probably fix it by next week. Well, knowing Elon, and so the car becomes a full computer, and so all of a sudden you want the car to have access to everything in your life. You want it to have your health data. If you had a heart attack right there in the front seat, it would be good if the car knew that. Yeah. You want the car to have all of your personal media information. You want the car to have the entire thing, and so before you know it, you want the car to be a front end on the cloud the exact same way the phone is, and I think that's the direction.
But it's missing one key thing: the heads-up display, so you can actually look at this while you're driving.
Yeah. Well, the driving part will be optional ultimately, but we still have a ways to go.
So Graeme, as the operational person on this panel, are you looking forward to this future?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting my business users satisfied just getting mobile apps out to them than the Teslas. So no, I think it's a great vision. I mean, I think about, today our data is very tightly bound to the app. Typically it's inside the enterprise. It's very hard to get it out. Next thing is decouple that data and app. Next thing, I'd love to do my corporate note-taking in Evernote because that's what I use personally. Mm-hmm. I can't today for obvious reasons, but providing that channel of access to that data through my own personal business logic, great, fantastic.
So I have I have a challenge to the audience, and then I have a question I want to call up. So remember, the hashtag here is #FutureOfIT, and if you can think of a specific application that's going to be a hit sort of in 2015, 2018. Tweet it up, and I will read those off.
Also, I'll issue term sheets on the spot. That's my day job.
And what's the cap sheet going to look like?
Oh, it's going to be brutal.
It's brutal, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I can say one more thing about applications, which is,
Andy.
obviously we're surrounded by smartphones, iPads, anything, Android systems. So the consumer apps are in fact getting all the attention because that's what we see on our devices on a daily basis. But make no mistake, the enterprise ads are not going away. And if you look at this from a dollar perspective, there's an orders of magnitude more money spent on enterprise apps than on consumer apps.
Yeah.
Just to make that minor point.
And I always like to say, why did Jesse James rob banks? That's where the money was. Why does IT need to pursue the enterprise? It's where the money is, right?
So that means it means IT is going to go to the consumer side.
Well, or consumerization is happening.
What people want is easy to deploy
expectations.
enterprise apps, right? I mean, they don't understand why it takes weeks and weeks to deploy a new thing in enterprise, and that's obviously going to change.
No, I mean, that's exactly the pressure on us is, that consumer experience brought to the enterprise. How do we do that, but still maintain security, et cetera, reliability?
Sure. It's awesome.
And not lose people's notes on a Friday afternoon. That helps.
Well, let's pursue this a little bit. John Markoff at the New York Times many years ago made the observation that we have an inversion in the electronics business, that once upon a time, during the Apollo days, the most advanced technologies came out, and NASA and the warlords got them first. And then it trickled down to us little people and kids. And then sometime in the 90s, there was a perfect reversal of this. The most advanced technologies, thanks to the magic of Moore's law and scaling of microprocessors, the most advanced technologies were going into video games, and the warlords had to await their turn. And we've certainly seen that happen in a couple of waves with the internet and the like. I don't see that doesn't continue.
I don't agree with that, actually. I think what's really happening here is, Intel makes the Haswell chip. There's the mobile version, there's the desktop version, there's the server version. It turns out the server version is 9 months behind because they wanted to add more cores, but it's actually the same technology. What's really happening is in enterprises, there's much longer qualification cycles. So it'll take flash technology, right? Every iPhone, iPad has flash. By the time flash really got an enterprise, it was 2 years or 3 years later because it wasn't actually bulletproof enough to deploy for enterprise applications. So the same technologies play in both places. It just takes longer to get them into the enterprise.
Oh, and I agree. I mean, the time I saw it was there was a chip line in the valley, and the same line off it was coming supercomputer chips and chips for the new, I think it was the Nintendo.
But adding to this, so what is true is that consumer devices have actually more volume. So when you look at the flash volumes, it's probably 98% consumer and 1 or 2% enterprise. So it does shift where certain investments are going, but the enterprise is not losing access to new technology.
Same thing with CPUs. Same thing with hard drives.
Yeah, this is sort of the ARM-Intel question, I guess.
Yeah, so ARM-based servers, Mark?
Yeah, ARM-based servers. Well, this is a great example. ARM-based servers are right on the cusp. And
Never happens.
What?
Never happens.
Data centers small enough to lose in a pocket full of change.
Never happened is a bold claim. Is it, you going to put some money behind that?
Sure.
Expensive.
Okay.
Expensive bottle of scotch.
I want to get into the middle of this argument.
we can do this at longbets.org.
Okay.
So
I think we could do it
let's
at,
frame the question.
I think we could do it at shortbets.org.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So my opinion, Mark, on this is, architectures form ecosystems, right? With it, and clearly we had the client-server ecosystem. x86 was on both sides of it. When you go to the cloud-mobile ecosystem, x86 is clearly the architecture of the cloud, and ARM is clearly the architecture of the mobile devices. To create an architectural ecosystem is extraordinary. You need dramatic advantages to form a new architectural ecosystem. x86 is the cloud ecosystem. Why would I ever have an ARM-based ecosystem that doesn't use the same drivers, the same software, the OS, the scale, the operating systems, all of those kind of things, if in fact that ecosystem continues to innovate? So as long as Intel and x86 continues to innovate, right, ARM needs an extraordinary advantage. And today, if I took the power of an ARM chip to zero, it's still only 20% of the server data center. It just isn't big enough to give you that huge advantage that you need. The only reason people are working on ARM ecosystems is to keep Intel honest. And as long as they keep executing, right, it'll be x86 there forever. I gave a speech at at the Hot Chips Forum, where I described that ARM guys investing over here, you're going to fail. x86 investing over in the mobile side, you're going to fail, because that ecosystem has also said it's about ARM. So both of you were equally pissed off as me, right, as I described that, no, neither one of you are going to succeed in the other ecosystem.
So I'll take the more, as will come as no shock to you, I'll take the more radical stance, which is the price performance advantages are bigger than 20%. And it's actually a combination of cost savings on things like space and power with ARM. It's also taking the margins out of what historically has been a high margin server processing business, which is of course the threat to the incumbent in this case. So I think the advantages are greater, and I think people, especially on the internet side of things, especially on the consumer applications, the high-scale consumer apps and high-scale kind of grid environments are very, very focused on these cost elements. And then I think 80% of the architecture change has already happened, and the reason for the applications I'm talking about, which are kind of the new applications, because they're already running on runtimes that have intermediated themselves between the application and the chip anyway. So the majority of the applications I'm talking about would have no idea if they're running on an x86 chip as compared to an ARM
level,
chip.
but you got this whole big software stack underneath it to run in the ecosystem to go with it.
Yeah, but it's Linux. So, I mean, it's ARM on Linux, and you're 90% of the way there.
Not even close, not even close. You got drivers, you got software infrastructure to go and through the network, security infrastructure to go against it.
So we're going to get a bet with some money here.
For this bet.
Andy, quick comment, and I want to read off some of the tweets here.
There's no question that ARM has a number of advantages, but it's not really good at virtualization. I'll say that much.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe I have ulterior motives as well. Is that what you're suggesting, Andy?
And you used to work for who again? I forget.
Intel.
So
fantastic company, by the way. Great.
Just a couple of killer apps here, and this is being recorded, and Mark will talk to you about business plans afterwards. The app of 2000, this is Klaus, the app of 2018 is the AI friend, Siri, but way much better. 3 lines under way much. Killer app of 2018, how about adaptive software that predicts what you need before you know it? Tyler Hardison. Oh, darn, there was a really good one here, and I'll just...
You know what those two have in common is a good example of some of these trends. You can see it as Google Now. For those of you who haven't tried it, Google Now is worth trying, and it's now comes standard on all the new Android phones. And it's kind of the next turn on Siri, and the big thing is it anticipates you, and it's really fun to use because it starts to surprise you in sort of unexpected ways. It starts to tell you when your flight's delayed. It starts to tell you when there's traffic on the way to work. You know, it starts to tell you, what are local restaurants that are open if you hadn't had dinner. And you realize that you didn't tell it that you hadn't had dinner. It just somehow knew, right? Or you didn't tell it where you lived. It just figured it out because you drive there every night.
And so the
sort of AI-ish components of what Google in particular is doing on this is moving very fast. This stuff, and right, it's obvious, right? This is just the front end, and the back end is the big data, right? Analytics, thing at monstrous scale to be able to figure all that stuff out. And then you want those features on any device that happen to be near you, right? You want that on your watch. You want that, in your ear, whatever.
We have about 10 minutes left here, and I realized I didn't tell the panel what my last question would be. So I figured I better tell you that so you get a chance to think about it. And that is, when we meet here in 2020, what will be the hot things we will be talking about? So you have 10 minutes to come up with an answer. Kurt Marco is off in the audience somewhere. Oh, perfect. Kurt, you're right next to a mic. He had a tweeted question, why is building your own data center not like building your own power plant? So, and actually that's pretty good. So no need to stand up. Why is...
Well, so on the internet, on the sort of the new generation side, for the new companies, actually, when they build their own data centers now, it is like building their own power plants. It is what they're doing. And so I'm on the Facebook board, and I'll use Facebook as an example, which was when Facebook builds a new data center now, it really thinks in terms of the building as the server. And so it's an integrated architecture from the chip all the way to the building. And you have all kinds of different design decisions and architectural trade-offs that you make when you think that way. And so, for example, you tend to want to put the data center in a place that's very cold. Because you want to address the heat issue holistically.
And next to a power plant.
Very cold, next to a power plant.
Next to running water, right? Where you can get easy access to hydroelectric power. And then you want to do other things. For example, you tend to want to drive towards using you want to use very high volume, low cost hardware, and you want to go to a disposable hardware model, and then what you realize from there is you can then run the data center at higher levels of heat. than most data centers. You can run these things at 100, 110 degrees. And so there's a whole bunch of decisions that you make when you kind of think in those terms. And it is, I think it's analogous to the kind of engineering that goes into building a power plant.
So,
Well, but I think that analogy to me is quite trite, right? You know, building a power plant, you know, I mean, you're delivering 120 volt AC, right? It's undifferentiated, it is absolutely globally distributed, it's absolutely a standard. Right, you know, data centers aren't built, right, you know, for, right, a single, right, usage, right, to deliver a single thing that is absolutely standardized on a global basis. Not even close, right, you know, and you have privacy issues, you have all these other data governance issues, you're running a wide set of different applications on it. You know, to me, I mean, it's a nice, fun little analogy, but it is nowhere close to applicable to the environment that we're in today. Maybe 20, 50, 100 years from now, it may be, right, that we've gotten that simplified and that standardized, where just give me an IP tone and I'm done, right, but we're not even close to that.
Plus, you don't need environmental reviews if you build a data center.
Graham, I saw you nodding your head.
Question.
Oh, there's a question. Ooh.
I was actually going to clarify that. It was back to the discussion between Marc, who, like, I couldn't agree with more throughout this whole thing, talking about everybody migrating to the cloud, and Pat talking about, no, we're still going to have data centers. And I'm drawing the analogy to, you know, why isn't that like Ford having the Rouge with, you know, its own power plant and steel refinery or steel plant, and, you know, next to its car manufacturing facility? Why, that's an obsolete business model now. So why would people that are not in the business of providing data center services build their own?
I mean, one thing I will say is you need to have a certain scale to justify building a data center. I mean, don't build small data centers anywhere. That's sort of 1990s.
Define small.
Well, like, you know, 10,000 square foot here and there. I mean, if it's not like 100,000 square foot, you know, just sort of forget it.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a tremendously complex engineering task, and I think only the biggest companies can think about building their own. Some with unique requirements like we do. We have specific regional requirements by law. We have to find our data centers, and also specific security requirements.
And
for the average person, though, I'll say what Pat's saying. You know, we're not. Most enterprises are not in the situation where they can start from a clean sheet of paper, design apps from the ground up, and tremendous for the folks who do have that opportunity.
And I should also say, look, I don't want to get stereotyped. So there are
I
people.
want to come back to Pat.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll have a good response to whatever I say. I don't want to get stereotyped. Like, there are people who say, look, there's just going to be 5 companies that run data centers, 5 cloud providers, and that's going to be it, and everybody's done. Like, I'm not on that page. I think there's going to be lots of different kinds of companies and organizations that have different kinds of data centers, different kinds of servers. There's specialized environments. In fact, you could argue you're actually going to go to more specialization in data centers. There's the whole thread we could have on that. And so I do think we live in a complex world. We live in a world where people move at different paces and have different requirements. There's going to be a lot of variation. However, what I'm trying to argue is you can see the patterns of what the future looks like by looking at what the leading edge companies are doing. You can see the forward direction. You can see what these things look like when the sort of the most advanced companies of the world are putting a lot of money against these problems. And you can kind of see what's going to happen in the rest of the industry as you follow that thread. And those have been the kinds of things I've been trying to highlight.
Pat, I have a specific question for you. I mean, from the perspective not just of the company you're running, but, you know, being a CEO is a unique role of adult supervision, and you've been adult supervision, I think, a professional adult supervision longer than anyone on this panel, and, you know, Marc is, well...
Longer than I've been an adult?
Yes. I'm really struck by Kurt's mention of the Rouge plant at Ford, and we all know that famous history that Henry Ford tried to do a deeply vertically integrated plant all the way down to planting his own rubber trees in Brazil, and that was clearly too far. At a practical level, as a CEO who deals with issues like that all the time, how do you balance that question of how much is too much integration, how much is too little? Practical advice for folks in the audience.
Well, you know, I think any company has to look at, okay, what are you good at? What are you differentiated in? right? And it becomes, and if it doesn't fit into those things that you're really good at and really uniquely capable of, right, you should probably be getting out of it. We just sold 6 businesses earlier this year, right? Things that we consciously said we're getting out of. We own Zimbra, right? Guess what? We weren't going to invest a lot in cloud mail, right? So we got out of a bunch of businesses as well, and we've sort of buckled down to focus on these 3 areas that we've talked about here at the conference. And with it, the CEO's job, right, not only is saying this is where we're going, but this is also what we're not going to go do. And often the decisions of saying what you're not going to go do are more important than the decisions of saying what you are going to go do. And I think every company needs to look at that stuff. And in some of these discussions, like we said, some things data centers shouldn't be running. Well, stop doing those things. If you're not really going to be good and differentiated in it, get out of those things, right? Go find other cloud-based solutions for it. But be very, very specific about what you are good at, what you're going to invest in, and then be really good and differentiate at those things for competitive advantage.
Graeme, did you have an additional? I
think just being very deliberate in your decision making in that regard, be very transparent is the best advice back to the back to your businesses. Really understand what they want, and then help them demonstrate it's the best decision for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd love to manage Marc Andreessen someday. That would be fun.
I always think of Nietzsche's famous quote, "Please, Lord, don't drive the devil from me, lest you take away the best part." So,
Andy. One more, which is, 10, 20 years ago, the hot topic was outsourcing to India or somewhere in the Far East. And that's a lot less the topic these days, because the real way to cut costs is actually to make it more automated and more efficient. If you look at these cloud-based data centers, there's hardly any people in them.
Yeah, and that I think Marc is absolutely right. Some of these large cloud-oriented automated data centers, they are, right, the template for what we need to build inside of enterprise data centers as well.
I'd say, so why does anybody want to work in the enterprise? Why don't we all want to work for, Facebook or Google? It's as much of a challenge for us driving process efficiency and standardization across a disparate portfolio of applications as the eBays and Googles have with just a few.
So we have just 5 minutes left, and I want to give a good, proper amount of time to this final question of, it's 2020, we're meeting again. What are the hot things we're talking about, or the things we go, how did we ever miss that in 2016?
First?
No. I'm going to put Andy first, because I know he's on record as saying it's impossible to look out more than 3 years.
No. I'll actually talk about hardware, and it's actually fairly predictable what's going to be in the hardware. Back on Moore's law, transistors will double every other year. We're going from 8-core to 12-core to 16-core to 32-core and so on. So this memory is getting a lot cheaper, flash is getting cheaper, networking is getting cheaper. It's a very predictable cost performance improvement for the next many years. And if one really extrapolates out, the purchasing, what you can get for the same amount of dollars in 2020 compared to today is maybe a factor of 100 better. It's actually astonishing. So quick adoption of next generation technologies, quick renovation of existing data centers is a good thing, because you're going to get a lot more cost performance, power efficiency, all these attributes just by adopting the latest technologies. Okay. So I don't think there's any surprises there. We'll have 10 gigabit now, 40 gigabit next year, 100 gigabit a few years later. All of this is already in the can, they would say in Hollywood.
Okay, Marc, you're next. This better be good.
Hopefully. So I think it's going to be, the topic of discussion 5, 10, 15 years out is going to be all the social and political tension generated by the rate of change. So there was a book in the early 70s called The Future Shock that a lot of people read and admired. My assertion is Future Shock was actually completely correct in everything that it said. It was just literally written 40 years too early. I think we live in the Future Shock world now, and the thesis of Future Shock was, at a certain point, as civilization develops or as things happen, things just start to move so fast, and in particular technology starts to move so fast that people's brains have trouble keeping up with what's happening, and it seems like the entire world is just changing at a fundamentally unacceptably fast pace. I think that's what we're going to be dealing with, and I think this whole Snowden thing we mentioned earlier, I think is a great case study of this. The Snowden affair is like a Rorschach test for what we think about all kinds of social and political issues. Is he a hero? Is he a traitor? So forth. Like on the security thing, earlier, it's like a lot of people hear about the whole Snowden thing and they get horrified at the idea of information being in the cloud, because they say, oh my God, the government can come in and get the information out of the cloud, and they wouldn't be able to do that if it was in my data center, I look at this Snowden thing and I'm like horrified that a guy could walk a thumb drive out of a secure NSA facility with 20,000 documents on it. And oh my God, doesn't that show how internal environments are fundamentally insecure? Like, it's the same fact, just perceived completely differently depending on where you're coming from. And I think that's going to be true more and more on all kinds of social issues. I think it's going to be true on all kinds of political issues, all kinds of economic issues, and issues involving all these debates now about where all the jobs are going to come from, as software automates more and more things. And it's going to be the social and political issues that apply to people that are going to be where all the tension are. And I think they're going to get much bigger than they are now.
Thank you. Graeme, you're next, and I'm going to give Pat the last word.
Sure. So, I mean, for me, I think personally very excited about the whole Internet of Things, the connected devices, the fact that I was listening to a podcast the other day, by Christmas I'll be able to tell when I need to buy new eggs for my refrigerator because I'll have an Internet-connected tray for my eggs to live in. That kind of thing is great from a convenience perspective, but I think, as with all technology things, the organizational, ethical dilemmas, I think, will then follow. They're much more tricky. So I think when we come back, we'll be still talking maybe renewed about the ethical, privacy, convenience balance, and where we exactly strike that as a society. That's my personal belief.
Pat, what are we all going to be talking about in 2020?
The thing that I think will be, right, if you think about the social, mobile, cloud, big data, right, that occur, largely over, right, the rest of this decade, I think we'll have finished building out the cloud infrastructure. We'll have established this environment for, think about the economics of being able to spin up 100,000 cores, right, and be able to spin them down within a second, and be able to operate, essentially the largest supercomputer ever built, right, for $2, right, for exactly 2 minutes to run my algorithm. I mean, it's just going to be extraordinary, right, what we're going to have accomplished, and the ability to network and tie these things together, connect up pretty much every human on the planet with some form of internet-connected device, right, by 2020, 2025. And I think, all of those things, I think we can sort of envision that we're going to get those things done. But then I think what's going to happen is the big data analytics that we're going to be able to do on top of that are just going to astonish us, some of the things that will emerge as a result of that amount of compute capacity, that amount of global connectedness, that amount of human connectedness. And whether it's in the healthcare domain, probably the one that I see is probably going to be most extraordinary that we see, or in other domains, those big analytic data applications that emerge from that infrastructure that we built, right, those are the things that are just going to wow us by the end of this decade.
I can think of nothing better to say, so it's a perfect place to stop. Please join me in giving the panelists a hand. So I've had the privilege of reading all of your tweets up here, and I obviously only got to a tiny fraction of the questions. Know that all of those questions and tweets and comments are going to be saved, and the VMware team is going to be putting them together and putting out a report, and also talking to some of the panelists to get answers on things that weren't answered in the session. So again, thanks to you all. We now head into a break. Thank you, gentlemen.